Nobel Prize-winning economist Professor Joseph Stiglitz has won the 2018 Sydney Peace Prize. Stiglitz has written extensively on the issue of global inequality and has argued that economies must break the cycle of power and greed.
He's also commented on the startling revelations of the Financial Services Royal Commission in Australia and the need for banks to start putting the welfare of customers ahead of profits. I spoke with him earlier from Columbia University in New York. Joseph Stiglitz, welcome and congratulations.
Well, thank you. It's a real honour.
Now, the Sydney Peace Prize recognises your leadership in a global conversation about the crisis caused by economic inequality. Is this growing inequality a failure of capitalism or a failure of our political leadership?
I think it's more a failure of our political leadership. That is to say, one of the things I've argued in my books is that we could shape the market economy in ways that would lead to actually faster economic growth and more shared prosperity. I think if you were a critic of capitalism, you might say, well, the politics themselves are part of the capitalist system, and that's part of the vicious circle where you have a political system that reflects the interest of the very wealthy, and they pass laws, regulations, make the economic system work in ways that benefit them at the expense of the rest of society.
So we need that economic leadership, if you will. I noticed that you've labelled President Donald Trump a demagogue. Why are we seeing the election of populists at the moment, do you think? Are they not merely reflecting the view of many who feel as though globalisation has failed them?
That's right. I think that's one component. What they know is that they are not doing very well. If you look at, for instance, data for the United States, what you see over the last 40, 50 years, that the people in the top 1%, their average income has really soared. But the average income of the bottom 90% is barely nudged at all. The median income of a full-time male worker in the United States is at the same level that it was 42 years ago. And those with less education have actually seen their incomes decline. So what is clear is that what was promised, that globalization would make everybody better off, that trickle-down economics would make everybody better off, that financial market liberalization would make everybody better off, all of those promises have not been delivered. And so the result of this is there's a real suspicion of, you might call, the establishment, the conventional elites, and they're looking for something else. And that's why they're turning to demagogues. Unfortunately, most of these demagogues, sometimes called populists, have policies that are not actually going to succeed in making these people better off.
And added to that is that gap between the rich and poor in the United States about to get wider, with President Trump having declared a trade war with China. He speaks of winners and losers.
I think they're going to be mostly losers. What will happen as a result of Trump's trade war is that, again, many of the people who have not been doing very well in the United States are going to find themselves worse off. For instance, there's likely to be retaliation against our farmers. They could see a major decline in their incomes. We've created over the last quarter century efficient global supply chains. That was very disturbing for many people, but destroying these global supply chains, deglobalization, is going to be equally disturbing, and it's going to be equally painful for these very same groups.
I read that you've said that Chinese officials are laughing at Trump for his primitive approach to trade action he's taking against China. How so?
He would like to create a world, and again a world that's gone by, where there's a single dominant country in the world, the United States. But China is already a big player in trade and global savings and its GDP and PPP terms, purchasing power parity, the usual way we compare countries, is actually larger than the United States. So again, it's a fantasy to think that he could return to a world in which the United States dictates the terms of trade.
Well, President Trump has also abandoned the Trans-Pacific Partnership, although he said he may be now reconsidering it. Why not pursue bilateral agreements rather than multinational trading blocs? That's certainly what he tends to favour. Is there any merit in that?
From an economic point of view, there's absolutely no merit at all. It's like in ordinary commerce, we would never go back to barter, where I trade with you, you trade with somebody else. We'd have to have barter, and we'd have to adjust our balance of trade person by person. We couldn't work that way. Our economy couldn't function. And what he wants to do is basically want a balance of trade between every two countries. That can't work. It's actually, I should put it, it's really silly.
A lot of focus on the banking industry here at the moment. Australia has a public inquiry into the financial services industry, which has exposed unethical behaviour of banks. Do you think there's a fundamental problem with the banking system that it's driven by profit rather than the welfare of its customers?
Very much so. I think that's not the only problem. I think there has been a degradation of moral life. In one of my books, I called it moral turpitude. Something happens when people enter the banking system that somehow that focus on money destroys other values. And, you know, what's going on in Australia is reflected as what's going on in the United States and in the UK. We've had predatory lending, we've had abusive credit card practices, we've had market manipulation, we had Wells Fargo opening up accounts without people's permission. We had, you know, just every few weeks we have a new scandal on the part of one bank or another, the role that they play in tax evasion, tax avoidance, and moving money to tax havens. So I think there is a very deep problem. Interestingly, there are some branches of the financial sector that have not been subject to this kind of criticism, this kind of problem. What we call our credit unions, which are sort of mutual organizations set up not to take money and make money off of savers, but to provide financial products that enhance the whole community. So I think there are other models which are not so subject to the abuses that we've seen in the financial markets in Australia, the United States, and in so many other countries.
Professor Joseph Stiglitz, once again, congratulations and thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.